He went to the bathroom 10 times a day, but never wiped. Instead, he rolled the toilet paper into little balls, dampened them, squeezed out the excess water, applied glue to hold their shape, wrapped them in more paper, and through repeated pressing and molding, eventually crafted a working key to break out of prison. When a guard removed Mike's handcuffs, he quietly stuffed the paper wad into the keyhole, allowing him to easily push open the small window and reach the electronic lock outside. But the question remained, how would he get the passcode? The clever Mike glanced at the milk carton in his hand and instantly had an idea. He flattened the carton, unfolded it, and used a spoon to scrape out the waxy lining inside. When the guards weren't looking, he pressed the wax film onto the keypad. This way, when someone entered the code, their fingerprints would be left behind. And by matching those prints to the buttons, he could figure out the 4-digit combination. After some trial and error, the cell door finally swung open. But Mike knew that escaping would take much more than that. He needed 2 things. First, to learn the guards' patrol patterns and find the right window of opportunity. Second, someone on the outside to help him get away. This seemingly airtight prison actually had one fatal flaw. Right next to solitary confinement was a fire station with 0 security. So Mike deliberately started trouble and got himself thrown into solitary. There, he carefully observed and discovered that only 2 guards were on duty, and they often stepped out to chat, giving him his chance. Through the iron grating above the isolation cell, Mike could clearly hear the door opening and closing on the rooftop, and he calculated that the guards' smoke breaks lasted about 7 minutes. Then he used the surveillance cameras to relay his escape timeline to a hacker friend. With everything in place, the operation officially began. After opening the coded lock, Mike first rewound the surveillance footage to create the illusion that he was still in his cell, buying himself more time. He then made his way through the ventilation ducts to the fire station and changed into a firefighter's uniform. Meanwhile, the 2 guards were still chatting on the rooftop. That's when a female teammate made her move. She deliberately set off an explosion in the parking lot next to the prison, drawing out the fire crew. Mike had already hidden under one of the trucks, and with everyone rushing to fight the fire, no one noticed him. In the end, Mike successfully hitched a ride with his teammates and escaped the prison. Here's the twist. He wasn't actually a criminal. He was a professional escape artist hired by the Federal Bureau of Prisons to test the security of maximum security facilities across the country. His method was to get locked up under a fake identity and then break out using nothing but his wits. Over the past 7 years, Mike had taken on 15 top-tier prisons, and not a single one could hold him. Then one day, some CIA agents came knocking, telling him about a mysterious prison that housed criminals no country was willing to take in. The CIA wanted to test the security of this facility, but they didn't even know where it was located. It was an extremely risky mission, yet Mike agreed. Before long, the day of his capture arrived. Before setting out, his team implanted a GPS tracker in his arm. Once he reached the outside location, Mike was quickly grabbed, but he didn't expect these people to be so brutal. They first hit him with a stun gun. Then, as if they already knew his tricks, they dug the GPS out of his arm with a tool. Finally, they injected a sedative into his neck, knocking him out cold. When Mike regained consciousness, he found himself facing a warden in a suit. Feeling uneasy, Mike said this mission was way too violent and he wanted out. He uttered the extraction code, "I love KFC," and demanded the warden release him. But the warden completely ignored him and threw him into a cell anyway. It turned out the warden had already made a deal with someone who wanted Mike dead, planning to lock him up for the rest of his life. But Mike obviously wasn't about to go down without a fight. The problem was, this was the most secure prison on the planet. Every cell was made of reinforced glass, and even using the toilet was fully exposed to surveillance cameras. There was no way to make any secret moves. The cells were suspended in midair, making traditional tunnel escapes impossible. The interior was completely sealed off, with no sunlight getting through. The guards vastly outnumbered the inmates and were fully armed, wearing masks to prevent any personal contact with prisoners. Surveillance was everywhere, including roving spherical cameras that could track anyone, anytime. Days passed, and Mike couldn't find a single weakness. His only option was to try his luck in solitary confinement. But to get there, he'd need to start some trouble first. That's when a prisoner named John approached him, seemingly aware of his intentions, and offered to help. The 2 staged a fight, and both got thrown into solitary. Inside, blinding lights blazed and the air was scorching hot, making it nearly impossible to keep your eyes open. Mike quickly became dehydrated and felt terrible, but he also spotted an opening. After getting out, John continued to stick close to Mike, who asked him to get a piece of metal. So John went to the warden and hurled insults at him like a madman, getting himself beaten to a pulp. But in the chaos, John managed to pry off a manhole cover. Once he had the cover, Mike told John he was an escape expert and shared what he'd discovered. The prison structure was vertical, likely built underground. In solitary, he'd noticed the floor was hollow. If they could pry it open, they could follow the pipes out. But how to pry it open? It was actually pretty simple. The steel rivets in the floor would rust in the damp underground environment. All they needed to do was polish the manhole cover with toothpaste, reflect the light onto the rivets, and the heat would cause them to expand and pop out. They quickly put the plan into action, caused another disturbance, and got thrown back into solitary. This time, Mike used the intense light to focus heat on the rivets. After a few minutes, they expanded and fell out on their own. He repeated the process on the remaining rivets. When he finished, he stuffed a piece of bread in his mouth and tapped on the wall to signal John. John immediately started yelling, which drew the warden's attention. Mike quickly smeared the bread over the surveillance camera, pried open the floor, and dropped into the basement. He began climbing through the pipes, but when he lifted the hatch and crawled out, he froze. This wasn't a prison, it was a ship. Jumping overboard was out of the question. The vessel was sailing across the open ocean with patrols everywhere. With no other choice, he retreated back to his cell. Mike felt utterly hopeless. This time, there really was no way out. But the trouble didn't stop there. The warden found the rivets, discovered Mike's escape plan, and ordered his men to torture him. Every time Mike closed his eyes to rest, guards would bang on his window. When he was on the verge of passing out from exhaustion, they'd burst in and beat him awake. Mike spent every day in a daze, constantly collapsing. Eventually, a doctor had to examine him. Even the doctor couldn't bear to watch. But despite everything, Mike refused to break. The moment they stopped the torture, he started planning his next escape. During mealtimes, Mike began secretly crafting escape tools under the table. Using 2 eyeglass lenses, a ballpoint pen, a piece of cardboard, and a glass tube, he built a simple sextant to measure their position. They also recruited a new teammate who pretended to make a deal with the warden in exchange for access to the deck. Once on deck, the teammate used Mike's sextant to calculate their coordinates. When Mike got the data, he immediately realized the ship was in the horse latitudes, a windless zone. By observing which way the toilet water swirled, he confirmed it went counterclockwise, meaning they were in the northern hemisphere. Combined with the warm, humid climate, he deduced they were likely off the coast of Morocco and Africa. The next step was finding someone who could get a message out. Mike thought of the prison doctor and had John stab him. While being treated in the infirmary, Mike told the doctor about their plan and pleaded with him to pass along a message. The doctor eventually agreed. On December 25th, with everything in place, the escape plan officially kicked off. Late that night, Mike tapped out Morse code in his cell to relay escape information, but the warden had been watching in secret. He quickly decoded the message and learned that a riot would break out in Block C the next day. The warden immediately sent a massive force to Block C, but he'd been played. The real escape was happening in Block B. By then, only 2 guards remained in Block B. Mike triggered a riot and slipped into the pipes, climbing upward, only to find the hatch was electronically locked. Mike decided to cut the power himself. He made his way to the electrical room and killed the lights. John seized the moment to open the hatch and make it to the deck, just as their rescue helicopter arrived. As John approached the aircraft, enemies swarmed in. But John didn't leave. His brother wasn't there yet. He ripped a machine gun off its mount and his eyes turned ice cold. This legendary figure instantly transformed into a merciless killing machine. Meanwhile, the warden had cornered Mike in the electrical room. He wasn't in any rush. He knew there was no way Mike could escape. But strangely, after quite a while, he still couldn't find him. Then just as the power came back on, he heard the water tank start flushing automatically. His smile vanished. He'd forgotten this crucial detail. Sure enough, Mike had been hiding in the tank. When the water released, it flushed him out to sea. Mike surfaced right as John spotted him and pulled him up the rescue ladder. Just then, the warden appeared on deck and opened fire on Mike. In that split second between life and death, John tossed down a weapon. Mike caught it smoothly, fired several shots, and hit the fuel tank beneath the warden. The warden looked down, and before he could say a word, he vanished in a wall of flames. Sometime later, they reached the African coastline, where a beautiful woman stepped forward to greet John. It turned out she was his daughter. She was the one who'd paid Mike in the first place, to help break her father out of prison. The moment Mike set foot in that prison, John had sought him out to team up. Clearly, the whole thing had been carefully orchestrated from the start. Mike gave a slight smile, his expression calm. The person he really had a score to settle with was the partner who had set him up. A few days later, that partner woke up to find himself trapped in a shipping container on a massive ocean liner. By the time the ship reached port, he'd surely be dead. In the end, Mike completed his mission and quietly walked off into the sunset. Watching this legendary tale of a tough guy breaking out of prison, you can't help but think, turns out the real power was knowledge all along.